Hey everybody. We are going to let this thing get all the way connected to the internet, and then we're going to invite Shannon Watts in here, who is the real reason that you want to be watching this Instagram live right now. But this is part of a series called Team Joe Talks, connected to all of us who want to support Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to become the next president and vice president of the United States of America. And I'm going to be joined by Shannon Watts, leader, founder of Moms Demand Action right now. But in case you were curious about what Amy's doing right now and what I'm getting out of doing right now, she just went to the grocery store and is, what are you packing up right now?
Got some cat food.
Cat food?
Can't leave without some Reese's.
Reese's. What else you got?
Some good bread.
All right.
There's something healthy in here, I swear.
Show us one healthy thing, and then I'm going to bring Shannon Watts in.
Raisins.
Okay, that's good. And some frozen strawberries. All right. Okay, let's find Shannon Watts. That's who we're really here to see and to listen to. So, I forgot how to do this. We did Instagram Lives every day, every weekday for a month or so, and now I'm looking for Shannon Watts. Come on. Be patient with me, folks. Here we go. I found it. Amy's laughing at me.
Hello.
Hey, Shannon, how are you?
I almost hung up when I saw all those raisins.
So that begs the question, what is in your refrigerator?
What is in my refrigerator? Things that children eat, because that's how I eat kind of as a child. I'm not a big fruits or vegetables kind of person. Milk for my cereal.
Is it like cookies and potato chips?
No. It's more of a carbohydrate kind of diet, the healthiest possible carbohydrates.
Sugar and carbohydrates, right? Let's just fuel our lives right now. There are 62 days, I think, until early voting begins in Texas. So, 2 months. What's 2 months of just eating pure energy and operating on adrenaline to make sure that we help to win the most important series of elections in our lifetimes. That's the way I'm
mainlining Captain Crunch.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, everybody knows, but I think I'm obligated to act as though there are some people who may not know who you are, Shannon. Shannon Watts is the founder and leader of Moms Demand Action. And she has, through extraordinary tenacity, innovation, creativity, and an incredible army of people, primarily moms, but as Shannon has always reminded me, not just moms, who want to make sure that we have gun laws in this country that make sense, that save lives, that respect the Second Amendment, and that we can find common ground on. And you don't have to be a Democrat, and it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or an independent, rural or urban America, just that you understand that there's a better way to do this, and there's no reason we should accept more than 100 of our fellow Americans losing their lives to gun violence every single day. And Shannon, beyond the fact that you have so masterfully outwitted the NRA and the gun lobby, and as their prospects and fortunes have fallen, you've now outnumbered them in the number of members. You're making progress in the halls of Congress and in state legislatures across the country. And beyond guns and gun violence, which is super, super important, I really have got to tell you, you give me hope for our democracy, that entrenched special interests, corporate PACs, the lobbyists, all that jazz is not more powerful than any collection of American citizens who set their minds to achieving a goal, no matter how tough that goal is, no matter how many years we have to work on it. And at a time that many of us are desperate for cause for hope and optimism, you have given that to us. So I'm so glad to be spending some time with you today. And
I feel the same way about you.
You're one of my all-time heroes, and I just very, very excited. So one preliminary question to get out of the way.
Yeah.
How do the eyebrows look?
They look great. I mean, I never realized that this was such an important part of your fan base, was their feelings about your eyebrows, until we did our first Instagram live together. And really the comments about your eyebrows, it outnumbered almost everything else. And so then it made me start to pay attention to them. And I was like, they're right. They're fantastic eyebrows.
Well, I was just fishing for a compliment there. Thank you. That also makes me feel good. So on everybody's mind right now is Joe Biden's selection of Kamala Harris to be his running mate. You have worked with her, you've interviewed her, you spent meaningful time with her. You've watched her as Attorney General of the state of California, as a U.S. Senator representing that state, as a candidate for the highest office in the land. Give us your impressions. What does it mean to you that Joe Biden selected, of all the extraordinary candidates he could have chosen from, Kamala Harris?
Oh, I mean, I said on Twitter yesterday, I felt this strange, unique emotion that I had not experienced for months and months. And I think it was called joy. I hadn't had that for a while. And I was just so thrilled. You know, I had the privilege of interviewing Kamala Harris back at our presidential forum, which was exactly a year ago after the horrific shootings in El Paso and Dayton. And she was so warm and so smart, and just really charismatic, and just knocked everyone's socks off. And then I got to interview her again in May as one of the Demanding Women series that I did with vice presidential candidates, potential. And, you know, when we got on Zoom together, we were alone for a while. And I said, hey, how are you? And I expected she would say, oh, I'm good. How are you? And instead she looked at me very intensely and said, there is so much suffering right now. People are suffering so much. And it just goes to show the importance of compassion, that we need that in our leaders. And I am just so thrilled about this ticket. It is the strongest ticket on this issue in the history of our country, obviously. And I know that day one, they will prioritize saving lives by preventing gun violence. I know it. And what about you? You've interacted with her too.
Yeah, I'm really excited. We got to know, my wife Amy and I got to know Kamala and Doug fairly well, as well as you're going to know someone against whom you're competing on the campaign trail. But one of the things that sticks out, and it's not a policy issue and may or may not be a leadership quality, I mean, I guess it is just this really keen sense of humor and sense of timing. So we're all about to talk to the gathered convention in New Hampshire of New Hampshire Democrats. And, you've been in this position, Shannon, you're about to go out in front of a couple thousand people, and you're thinking through what you want to say, and you're a little bit nervous. And, some young supporters had come up backstage to ask if I could take a picture. I said, absolutely, sure. And then Kamala comes in and gets in front of all of us and photo bombs and is cracking jokes and completely melted all the anxiety that I was feeling, and reminded me that sometimes you've just got to laugh at yourself and acknowledge just how extraordinary it is to have the chance to run and to be in this position. And nothing is so serious that you can't crack a joke or smile. And I love that about her. And it is really a challenge to maintain your humanity or to be human, right? There's so many forces pressuring you to be a prepackaged, produced thing as a candidate that is being sold to the public. And she could bring things back down to a human level. And I love that about her. And I think that is going to be so powerful, both on the campaign trail for the ticket and as a person in the second most important position of power in the world, really, to have someone who can connect at that human level is pretty special. So I'm excited. I'm with you. I feel joy right now.
Yay, joy.
Yeah. So a couple of things. So you and I got to know each other somewhat, and I was lucky enough to be able to interview you when we were doing an Instagram live series earlier in the quarantine at the start of the pandemic. We are now together in service of ensuring that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris become the next president and vice president of the United States. And they call these Team Biden talks. And so I want to remind everybody, this is something that the Biden campaign asked us to do, that the Democratic Convention is starting Monday the 17th, and you can follow at Joe Biden to stay in touch. And you can also text 30330 to join the campaign. And we'll repeat that again at the end. And then Joe Biden, his account might send a message that I can pin if I can figure that out. But Shannon, before I take some questions from the folks who are watching, they wanted me to ask a couple of icebreakers.
Yeah.
I already asked you what's in your refrigerator.
Not raisins.
What are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now?
Yeah.
So you want to talk about race. We have been doing these important talks about being anti-racist with our volunteers. And so that's Ijo. I can never pronounce her last name, but it's Ijoma Aluo. I think I got that right. And it's an amazing book. I just finished Tears We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson last week. And like everyone else in the country, I'm so interested in knowing more about what I can do to be anti-racist, what our organization can do. And look, gun violence is an intersectional issue. Police violence is gun violence. And so we are working to figure out how we can best support the partners who are doing gun violence work on the ground. Because look, when you look at violence interruption programs, you know, like I live near Oakland and there's Youth Alive here, and they're doing an amazing job of training teens to go into high schools and interrupt gun violence before it begins. And, you know, those are successful programs. We have to fund them. We have to support them. I know that's more than what am I reading, but.
No, that's perfect. Let me ask you a kind of unrelated to the topic you just described, but related to the general question. Do you ever read fiction or read something that's not serious? And I think given how serious the challenges are that we face, I wouldn't blame you or judge you if you said no, because I think we all have a lot of work to do to become aware fully of the challenges, the inequity, and the history of this country if we're going to get it right. But anything on the shelf that's just for fun?
I'll be honest with you. My downtime reading are magazines. And I think that shows the fact that I was born in the 70s, because I'm pretty sure they're going the way of the dinosaur. But I love nothing more than to save my stack of magazines like People and Oprah and like, you know, like we're not talking about Mensa material here, but stuff that I love. And then I read it over the weekend, usually in the bathtub.
I'm a sucker for Us or People.
Yeah, you are?
And I mean, if Amy would condone it, I might even subscribe. But if I can find it, you know, in a doctor's office or. Do
you want me to send you mine?
Yeah, I'll take your back copies.
Okay, it'll be a little late, but I'll mail them.
Sure, to live vicariously through the lives of, you know, these people who live, you know, you and I live somewhat of a public life. They are out in public all the time. You can't help but be interested. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but that's my guilty pleasure.
Now I love you even more. I know you like People.
Let me ask you, now I'm going to go somewhat deep. Okay. And then I promise I'll get to questions. There's a question button for those watching Shannon Watts right now. There's a question button at the bottom of your screen. If you hit that, and if you enter a thoughtful question, and you don't have to agree with Shannon Watts, you don't have to roll her a softball, but if it's a thoughtful, respectful question, I'll do my best to get to it and to ask it. I was reading an interview with you in this magazine called Sojourners, and you mentioned growing up in the 70s. I grew up in the 70s here in El Paso, Texas. You grew up in the 1970s, I believe, in New York State. You grew up in a Catholic household. You mentioned in the interview your dad was Catholic. My mom, fierce Catholic. And, you know, I think her probably greatest disappointment is that I don't attend Mass more regularly. And
I thought you were going to say that you're not a priest.
Well, I wanted to be honest with you, Shannon, growing up, I would read the lives of saints. You know, this is the kind of reading material my mom would provide for her kids. And so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in the church. I wanted to be a priest. And, you know, then life happens. And I think my perspective on a lot of these things changed. But you talk about this idea, you're talking about religion and Catholicism and Buddhism. and ego. And you talk about this idea of non-self, which I found to be fascinating because you are such a compelling, charismatic, captivating person. You're very much the face for many of us of the fight against gun violence in America. And it's not to say that there are not millions of people working alongside you doing that work and who preceded you doing that work. But tell me what the idea of non-self means to you and to your vision of leadership. I found that to be fascinating.
Well, thank you. You know, I am so grateful that I did find Buddhism before I started Moms Demand Action. I've been a practicing Buddhist now for, I would say, 12 years. And you know, I bet my dad was more Catholic than your mom. I'm just gonna,
Really?
My dad was in the seminary. He joined when he was 13 and was in it till he was 26. And, you know, I was sort of a priest who was married in many ways. And it just never clicked for me. That's not to say it doesn't for other people, but for me, when I started studying Buddhism, it was, oh, these are the answers to stop human suffering, which is in every single person's life, right? Everyone's going to suffer. And so the question is, how do you lessen that suffering? And there's a lot in Buddhism about ego and how do you keep the ego in check? Because if you don't, so many things make you suffer. And when I started Moms Demand Action, it was important to, I actually have seen my leadership in this organization as a Buddhist practice, in that it is so important to me that this is not about me, that it is not about, that I could leave the organization for whatever reason at any time and it would last into perpetuity, because it was actually fueled by gun violence survivors and volunteers and people who care about this, and not just mothers and others, but students and young people, which now we have Students Demand Action. And I struggle just like anyone does, right? My identity in many ways has become Moms Demand Action, but I need to be able to hold on to that loosely so that it is not everything to me. And I think that's just part of this non-self idea.
So one more question, and I promise, folks, I will not monopolize Shannon's time. But in that interview, you're talking about how you meet some of the challenges that you face with some level of equanimity that I think many of us would be jealous of. And you get to this conversation about anger, and anger versus righteous anger, and it made me think about the value of anger, because I find myself to be pretty angry about a lot of things right now in this country, and to some degree that fuels the work that I do, or it keeps me on track and focused and disciplined, and eyes on the prize, which is making sure that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris win, that Donald Trump does not gain another term, and that we end Trump and Trumpism in America. Yeah. There's this great quote from another important philosopher, Joe Strummer of The Clash, who, along with Mick Jones in the song Clampdown, talk about anger can be power if you know that you can use it. Is there a way to talk to us about how to channel? We may be tempted to despair. We may be angry. We saw the public murder of George Floyd. We're witnessing more than 165,000 of our fellow Americans, representing a quarter of all global deaths, die, many of them needlessly, from a preventable pandemic, the economic downturn that has followed, the stark inequality in this country. Tell us how to use, or how do you address the anger that you've got to feel and channel that into something productive?
Anger can be a really destructive emotion if you turn it inward or toward other people, and it can cause great harm. But what I have found is that if you turn it into action, it can cause great change. I am angry about the direction of this country. I am angry that we allow gun lobbyists to write our nation's gun laws. I'm angry that I woke up and the first thought today that I had is that today should be Rhonda Hart's daughter's Kimberly's 17th birthday.
Yeah.
And that anger could destroy me and eat me alive, or it could cause me to be an activist that tries to help other people. And we should all be angry. The question is, how do you use that anger? And if we're sitting on the sidelines and we're, insulting people, or we're, yelling people on Twitter, or doing things that are ultimately destructive, as opposed to maybe participating in a phone bank, or starting to, use peer-to-peer texting technology, or holding a fundraiser, that's how you can make that anger truly useful. And there isn't a single person in this country who shouldn't be angry, and that means there isn't a certain single person in this country who shouldn't be getting involved.
I'm so glad you mentioned Rhonda Hart, and you mentioned Kimberly, her daughter, who's taken from all of us, and who's one of your most outstanding Moms Demand volunteers, by the way.
She's great.
She does you all so proud here in Texas, and really anywhere she goes in the country. We also know, and I think you mentioned this on social media earlier, this is the 3rd anniversary of Charlottesville and Heather Heyer, and we've met her family and know what they have lost. It's a year and 9 days since 23 people were slaughtered in El Paso, Texas, by a man using a weapon of war inspired by the most racist, hateful president of our lifetimes. And in each instance, those who bore the brunt of injustice demand justice from us, and that has to propel us. And there's the phrase you used in that interview is almost a righteous anger that all of us should respond to and channel into change that can be productive. So I love the way you put it. I'm going to bring up, Shannon, the first question, and this is from
the first thoughtful question, I hope.
No, this is a good one. This is from a very good friend of mine with whom I traveled much of the country, Stephen Groves, who's working really hard right now to elect gun sense candidates in South Carolina. He asks, for those of us in states like South Carolina, how can we talk about guns in a way that doesn't scare voters?
So Beto, I'm interested in your perspective on this too, but what I have learned over the last almost 8 years is that you're much better off having discussions based on fact and data than you are just anecdote and emotion, right? That just brings us down a path of something that's not fruitful. If you can actually say, 100 Americans are shot and killed in this country every single day, nearly 40,000 every year, and here are the things that we know that are solutions to those deaths. I also think that when you have conversations, what you realize is you actually have more in common on this issue than you don't. We know that 90% of Americans, 80% of gun owners, 74% of NRA members, and that's a poll by a Republican pollster, support common sense gun laws like a background check on every gun sale. So, we were talking about our parents earlier. My dad is also conservative, was in the past a voter for Donald Trump, says he will vote for Joe Biden in this election, thankfully. But at first did not support the work that I was doing. Thought I wanted to confiscate people's guns, right? Many of our volunteers are gun owners, or their partners are gun owners. This is simply about restoring the responsibilities that go along with gun rights. And I'm proud to say that my dad now shows up at Moms Demand Action events in Illinois wearing his red t-shirt. When you're talking about gun extremists, and that is a very vocal minority of people, they believe any gun law whatsoever is an infringement on the Second Amendment. Even the Supreme Court says that's not true, right? And when we look at states that have strong gun laws, they have fewer gun deaths. It's just sort of intuitive and common sense. But what's your experience having these conversations in Texas?
Everything you just said rings true from what I've seen in Texas. And I think, and something that you are so good at and your volunteers are excellent at, is looking for that common ground by going to people where they are and listening to them, listening to a gun owner, listening to somebody who might vigorously disagree with my proposal that we shouldn't sell assault weapons. Tell me why that AR-15 is important to you. If it's not necessary for hunting, you can't really use it for self-defense. It was designed to kill people on a battlefield, and we saw what it does when it's used against civilians here in El Paso and countless other times across this country. But talk to me. I want to hear why this is important to you. And very often I learn something, and very often there's a concession made. Someone will say, "Look, Beto, I own an AR-15, and I know where you're coming from. And frankly, I don't really need this. I like it. It's fun to shoot. I like having it. I served in the military, and it just means something to me on a very personal level. And I respect that, and I'm grateful when people share that with me. But to your point, I find that we have a lot of common ground. I can't tell you how often someone who might disagree with me on a specific point of policy will agree because they have kids in school, and they know Kimberly's story, they know Rhonda's story, and they said, look, I'm really concerned for my kids, and what we're doing now certainly is not working. So let's work on something together. So it's not easy, but it's possible. One of the nonfiction books that I just finished that you may or may not like and you may or may not have read is a book on American history by Jill Lepore. And there's a whole section on gun culture and the NRA and the gun lobby in America and the gun extremism, which you, I think, so correctly identified as a very small but very vocal and very covered by the press minority. It is really a kind of a new development in American life. Mm-hmm. And this extremist position on the NRA is totally out of keeping with their foundation. And the nonsense from the Republican Party, to call it what it is, on common sense gun laws is really a relatively new development. When you and I were kids, even when you and I were young adults, that wasn't the position of George H.W. Bush. It wasn't the position of George Romney, Mitt Romney's dad. It's really kind of a new development in this country that is connected to new developments on reproductive rights, and this weird selfishness that we're seeing in the country where people won't wear masks, and they claim, much as they do with, I want to own this weapon of war, that you can't interfere with my right to not wear a mask and get you and your 87-year-old grandmother sick. So we're up against an interesting challenge and an interesting time, but I think the way that you pursue it, Shannon, makes so much sense. All right, let me bring up another question. This one's for you. What is your favorite punk rock band, Shannon Watts?
Oh, that's a really good question. So again, I did sort of spend a lot of time in the 80s. This is interesting, and I think will be controversial, and I'm happy to have the discussion. I just watched the documentary about the Go-Go's, and they considered themselves a punk band, at least in the beginning, and they're the only all-woman band that's ever played their own instruments, that was in the #1 hit single position for many, many years, over and over, and they are not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So can we consider them punk?
Yeah, absolutely. Kathy Valentine, who lives in Austin, Texas, who, foundational member and, amazing guitar player, sometimes joins our Instagram lives and actually joined one of our phone banks to reach out to voters in Texas.
This is like, it's a perfect circle. I can't believe that.
Right. And so I hope, Kathy, if you're watching, I hope you just heard Shannon Watts say that. She could have named a million different bands, and she named you all. And I think that's a great choice. Here's Shannon, a more serious question. And I'm going to guess, and we should make assumptions, I'm going to guess this is from someone who probably strongly disagrees with some of the positions that you and Moms Demand have taken. This is from Jordan, and he says, what is the point of having a gun registry other than confiscation? And I actually don't even know what your position is on a gun registry. I think Cory Booker was the first presidential candidate to call for one. Give us your thoughts on that.
Well, and I'd love to hear yours too, because I think you had a position on this when you were running for office. But, right now we are simply asking for a background check on every gun sale. And the reality is, there is not a registry. And in fact, we also have ghost guns, right, without serial numbers that are proliferating states across the country and putting so many people in danger. So this is sort of an NRA talking point that they always go to, that somehow they want to keep track of all your guns and then they're going to come get all your guns. It hasn't happened in the history of this country. I don't know of any political candidates who are suggesting that someone come get all of your guns. This is, again, about restoring responsibilities that go along with gun rights. What are your thoughts on that, and how did you address that when you were running?
Yeah, at first when Cory proposed that, I said, well, let's focus on universal background checks. Let's focus on what we were then at the time calling red flag laws. Let's focus on an assault weapons ban. but the logic of it makes so much sense. I've got to register my vehicle, my car, my truck that I drive for public safety purposes. And I don't know how many, hundreds of thousands of our fellow Americans are injured or killed in vehicular accidents, but it's very important for public safety that we have an understanding of who these vehicles are registered. As we do a test before you get your driver's license, and we entrust this vehicle that is, for peaceful uses and not intended to hurt anybody, but it can in the wrong hands and in hands that, are not trained for its use. So I want to credit Senator Booker for proposing what was politically inconvenient, but had a real sound logic to me, especially as really thanks to you and your volunteers really began to understand the epidemic of gun violence and this bullshit argument that gets made all the time from, particularly conservative Republicans. Shannon, if a universal background checks and some of these common sense measures on gun safety really worked, then you wouldn't have gun violence in Chicago. You wouldn't have gun violence in Gary, Indiana. You wouldn't have gun violence in...
It's the Groundhog's Day of talking points.
Right? And you've got to be so sick of hearing this, but, you mentioned the ghost guns and guns that were purchased without a background check in another jurisdiction with more lax laws that find their ways into Chicago, where, again, you have just been excellent about saying, yes, we are rightfully concerned about high-profile mass casualty shootings. We've got to stop those. But one or two at a time, Black children throughout this country are being killed disproportionately to their share of the population. And that is a crisis that does not get enough attention in America today. And we have to look at some of the root causes, and it is that disparity in gun laws and the level of background checks that are performed.
And I would just bring that back to the election too. When I started Moms Doing Action, I lived in Indiana. Mike Pence was my governor, and he signed many, many horrible gun bills that not only increased the gun deaths in the state of Indiana, but in Chicago, where if you know anything about Chicago, all you have to do is get in your car and drive 20 minutes over the border to Indiana, fill up your truck with guns at a gun show, no background check, no questions asked, bring them back and sell them in the city of Chicago. That's where many of the crime guns in the city come from.
I'm going to ask you one last question. This has gone by so fast, and we're already over 30 minutes, so I've exceeded my allotted time with you. But it's a really good question, and I've seen some of the comments that you've made about this. Your opinion on police and schools in America?
I think it's really important that we listen to Black and Latino students who right now are saying they do not want guns in their schools. We can see from data that guns in the hands of teachers and even SROs isn't necessarily an effective way of stopping gun violence. An effective way of stopping gun violence is before the gun violence occurs, right? So who are most school shooters? They're students who have easy access to guns in their homes. So that's why we talk so much about responsible and secure gun storage through our Be Smart campaign, right? You've got to store your guns locked, unloaded, separate from ammunition. Before COVID, 4.6 million kids lived in homes with unsecured guns. We've seen a historic number of gun sales for the last 4 months. Who knows what that number is going into the school year, whenever that starts. And I'm really concerned about kids bringing guns to school. But I think that it's really important to listen to the students, Black and brown students, who are saying, we are more likely to be disciplined disproportionately. Data shows that. And we are traumatized, and it does not behoove us to have guns on school grounds.
Shannon, in Texas, and I don't know what the national figure is, but in Texas, a Black 5-year-old child in a kindergarten classroom is 5 times as likely to be disciplined, suspended, and expelled as a white student for the same issue or infraction in front of the same teacher. And obviously, I always had thought of the schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline beginning in high school, maybe. And it begins when that kid is absolutely defenseless against the system that you just described. They're 5 years old. They're as innocent and vulnerable as it gets. And it's something that we've done nothing meaningfully to change in this country. And I think you were so right to point out that when you add firearms to that and corporal punishment and some of the abuses that we see in our larger society that are found in our classrooms, you do irreparable damage and harm to those kids and their prospects in life. Well, I have so much more I want to ask you.
I know.
I could just listen
to you. We got
to
to do this again.
Let's do it again. And really anything that we can ever do for you from El Paso, you have got it. We are your biggest fans. We're members of your chapter here in this community. We love the work that you're doing and are just so grateful for you and Mom's Demand and all of the heroes that you work with. So please keep it up. And then I know that
yes.
Biden.
And we're grateful for you for all you're doing in Texas, right? We only have 9 seats we have to flip in the House.
We're going to do it.
Hard.
This will be the first time in 20 years that we've had a Democratic majority. And the racial gerrymandering, the most onerous voter ID laws, the 750 polling locations that have been closed down, the drawing black and brown voters out of their districts to diminish the impact of their votes. All of that has an answer, and that's a Democratic majority that Shannon, every
we're
town.
We're spending $8 million to help. So
$8 million in the state of Texas. No one believed in Texas before this, and not at least in that way and to that degree. So you're our hero. Thank you so much. And one last programming note. I know the Biden campaign would love for you to follow at Joe Biden. You can just keep up to date on the latest happening in that important campaign and text 30330 to join the campaign. So Shannon, goodbye, be safe, stay healthy. I want to see you again soon. Let us know how we help you, and we will.
All right. Good luck with those raisins.
Adios. Bye-bye.
Bye.